Welcome to this month's Creation Justice webinar, a gathering place for building a faith-rooted and faith-sustained movement addressing many of the critical issues of our time. I'm Brooks Barrett, the Environmental Justice Minister for the United Church of Christ. I'm joined by my co-host, the Reverend Michael Malcolm, who is the Executive Director for the People's Justice Council and Alabama Interfaith Power and Light. Michael, recently I got an activist e-blast with the subject line, "It's a marathon, not a sprint." I thought about that today because our webinar features Charles Lee, who perhaps as much as anyone exemplifies being a marathon running champion in the struggle for environmental justice. Lee started running more than 40 years ago, and he is still running strong today. There's a reason we entitled this webinar, "A Relentless Struggle for Justice." As I reflect upon the inspiration of Lee's example, and as I think about the daily ups and downs of doing justice work today, I'm reminded of a quote by the writer Terry Goodkind, who said, "If the road is easy, you're likely going the wrong way." What are your thoughts, Michael, as we get started today?
Yeah, Brooks, thank you. And excuse me. Today is one of those days, those special days that occur at times when, and when it does, you've got to seize that day. You've got to seize that time. And at a time when we have NEPA that's being gutted, when we have regulations that's being rolled back, and EPA seems to be on life support, it is an honor to hear and speak with our elders. It becomes crucial, however, when you think of the fact that they've actually been where we are apparently headed. The blessing about today is that we are hearing from a pioneer who helped to cultivate the path that we find ourselves on today. I'm looking forward to hearing from Mr. Charles Lee, and I'm so grateful to hear his voice in this hour.
Thank you, Michael. Let me introduce Charles Lee, who is no doubt already known to many in our audience. Lee recently retired from the EPA after having served in multiple capacities, including Director of the Office of Environmental Justice and the Senior Policy Advisor for the Environmental Justice in the National Program Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights. Prior to that, Lee worked for the United Church of Christ Commission for Racial Justice. As we will hear today, he was involved in the birth of the environmental justice movement in a number of ways. That's where we are going to begin today. Charles, can you tell us about your early involvement in the environmental justice movement? How did the protests in Warren County, North Carolina, impact your thinking?
Sure. Um, Thanks, Brooks, and thanks, Michael, for those introductions and the opportunity to speak to all of you this afternoon. And I guess, that question is actually an interesting question because I was thinking about it. And actually, when we first started, um, you know, there was no name for these issues. So I guess, I would say that this is um, early involvement in issues related to race, poverty, and environmental quality. So, like I said, when I first started, it didn't have a name. I was actually working in Newark, New Jersey for an occupational safety and health organization when the protests in Warren County, North Carolina, took place. And these were protests by the community there over the siting of a hazardous waste PCB landfill. And the struggle there lasted several years, involved several lawsuits, and ended or culminated in a campaign of nonviolent civil disobedience in which some 500 people were arrested. And I and a number of colleagues traveled to Warren County when I read about it in the newspaper. and to find out more about what's going on, and certainly to show solidarity. And I think that, if anything, like many people ask me, so how did you get involved in environmental justice? Um, I think that what that did was really show me the power of the when issues of civil rights and environmentalism came together, that they had this incredibly transformative power for positive change. So, how did I come to this? I came of age in the late 60s and early 70s, and, with the protests against the war in Vietnam and the civil rights movement. And I was greatly influenced by the writings of Dr. King and others. So, in many ways, I was really kind of fortunate to end up working for a faith-based civil rights agency like the Commission for Racial Justice of the United Church of Christ. Um, there's a story. Uh, there's a there was once when Ben Chavis, who was the commission's director, he would introduce the staff of the commission and say there was like 25 African Americans and one Asian American soul brother. So, well, in any event, when I first started working on these issues, it was totally uncharted territory. And as you know, the environmental movement in the U.S. was virtually all white and largely affluent. And the civil rights movement was primarily focused on things like educational and employment opportunity, advancement, and political empowerment. So, a big question at that time was like, and it came from virtually everyone, was, so what does civil rights have to do with the environment? And I think we know the answer to that now, but at that time there wasn't this understanding that we have today of how the environment is the place where we um, play, learn, and pray. It is I guess it is a medium which connects everything, and it occupies a truly central place in virtually everything that we do.
So going back, Mr. Lee and Dr. Lee, and looking at your work on the toxic waste and race, could you tell us about the publishing of the toxic waste and race in terms of how it came about and what challenges were involved and the impact that the report actually had?
So yeah, so the story, grows right out of that report. Actually, it begins with the Warren County protests. Because of uh, the protests there, the commission began a national project looking at toxics and injustice. Um, and like I said, I was extremely fortunate that the commission hired me to run this project. The first thing I did was to research the issue and hold meetings and workshops around the country. Like, for example, um, Ben Chavis and I held held a workshop entitled La Agua es Vida in Albuquerque, New Mexico. This was in 1984. So this is when I first met Richard Moore, who everyone knows now is a true statesman for environmental justice. Um, I remember us using the term environmental racism, and I remember Richard calling me up several days later, really excited about having something that helped him to explicitly articulate this connection and how it described many of the issues he's already been working on. Um, I also traveled, for example, to Chicago and met Hazel Johnson for the first time. And Hazel, as you know, is the is uh, started the first African American environmental organization in a housing project. It was called Altgeld Gardens in the south side of Chicago. Um, and as we know, this is where President Barack Obama worked as a community organizer in his youth. One of the things that Hazel told me was how she would one day like to attend an environmental meeting where she was not the only person of color in the room. It, in any event, I came to realize over a couple of years how extensive and pervasive environmental how extensively and pervasively environmental issues affected people of color communities. In terms of citing of hazardous waste sites, lead poisoning, as you know, is great disparities there. Air pollution, again, great disparities. Uranium mining, for example, in native lands in the Southwest and other places, farm workers, and the list just goes on and on. So I started thinking about a way to bring this issue to national attention. Um, Shortly after the Warren County protest, there was a small study by the U.S. General Accounting Office. Now it's called the U.S. Governmental Accountability Office of four offsite um, hazardous waste landfills in EPA's Region 4, which covers the 8 southeastern states. That found that 3 out of the 4 were located in predominantly African American counties. So I thought that it would be great to replicate this on a national scale. And that's what led to the study, Toxic Waste and Race. Um, it's uh, had many findings, 3 of which I would point out. First, that race proved to be the most powerful predictor for where commercial hazardous waste transfer, disposal, and treatment facilities were located. Second, that 3 out of 5 Blacks and Latinos live in communities next to abandoned hazardous waste sites or Superfund sites, essentially. And third, there was a clustering of facilities where there was a finding that wasn't really, people didn't really take note of it too much, but that communities with 2 or more sites had a people of color percentage 2 times greater, 3 times greater than that of communities without sites. And this last point is pretty important because I've been making the point recently that this is not just a matter of disproportionality, but a question of like the concentration of where environmental burdens are. And this is, of course, this issue that is the holy grail of environmental justice, which is cumulative impacts. So we ended up releasing the report at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. on April 15th, 1987. There is a photo of me that of talking about the report at the podium there, and I have to mention this because that photo maybe have many memorable things about it, but for me, the most memorable thing was the fact that my hair was still black at that point. Um, the the report recommended, among other things, the establishment of a EPA office, a National Advisory Committee, a presidential executive order, all which came through. It also um, recommended further research and legislation on the issue. So this led to a whole bunch of cascading events. One of which was uh, the University of Michigan School of Natural Resources at that time convened the first ever national symposium on race and the incidence of environmental hazards. Uh, if you go from then to now, we find that research and scholarship on environmental justice issues are reside in hundreds of universities. There are probably thousands of peer-reviewed journal articles in all fields related to health, transportation, planning, food security, green space, and so on. Um, and and then and this just reflects, like what I said before, how the environment is something that's connected to everything, and there is this incredibly important and pronounced equity justice component to that. It has also led, besides activities uh, uh, at the federal level. The adoption of EJ laws, policies, and programs in both the uh, in virtually every state, as well as in a number of municipalities. Like for example, Chicago is now working on a cumulative impacts ordinance. Um, as I and then I would talk about this later. I think part of the next question. This led to the First National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit, which took place in 1991, and that coalesced a national grassroots movement around environmental justice. Um, it is important to note, I think, that what is perhaps the most influential study in the history of environmental justice was done not by a well-resourced university or government agency, but a small advocacy organization. And many of you may not know that there is now a third series for the famous Eyes on the Prize documentary on the civil rights movement. This is produced by HBO Max. The fourth episode of this third series is about the birth of environmental justice. And doing in that, Professor Bob Buller, makes the same point about how, this didn't come from, well-resourced and well-endowed government or agencies or universities, but from a small advocacy organization. I think that in this time when we probably will go through a period where the kinds of resources are not going to be as available um, for issues like environmental justice. That people thinking in a way where we can do with what we have and still make a big difference.
Thank you, Charles. It's so remarkable to me that you were involved in the Warren County protests or were there, that you were kind of led the way with the Toxic Waste and Race report, and then you were the lead organizer for the First National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit. I mean, three really crucial events in the birth and formation of the environmental justice movement. In terms of the summit, tell us about your role as the lead organizer. What were the greatest challenges in organizing it, and what impact did the summit have?
Well, I think that we approached this and Toxic Waste and Race certainly had a movement building orientation. That it was meant to establish is to bring an issue uh, to national attention, but also to focus attention and galvanize action. Uh, and in that respect, the when it was published, I just got phone calls from countless people from across the country, and they're telling me about how, they were working on the issue, that had to do with the color of the tap water or the waste site that was being cited, or the incinerator being cited in the neighborhoods, and that they finally put it together. in terms of the fact that this had to that these things are not just things that just happen, but that race and racism had a important part to do with that, and it gave them something in which they could advocate around. Um, at that time, there was there was a letter that grew that was sent by Richard Moore from the Southwest Network for Environmental Economic Justice and other people to what was known as the Big Ten environmental organizations. So these are the traditional mainstream environmental organizations, and it took it was taking them to task for their lack of diversity in terms of their membership and their staff, and the kind of policy positions they were taking that were really counter to the interests of people of color. So shortly after that was sent, Ben, called for a summit meeting with the Big Ten, with the leadership of the Big Ten, and I looked at that and I said, yeah, that what would have been just a small meeting and may not be the most effective way or the most useful way to make use of this moment. Um, and that it is true that there's this question about who sets the table and how they set it and who determines what the menu is actually really important. And I had figured out by that time that there was just this incredible amount of activity around this in people of color and poor communities, and and that this is an opportunity to set our plate, to bring people together on their own terms, to showcase the kind of leadership and accomplishments that were already being made by people of color organizations in their communities, and that there was this was ample enough to be able to really kind of talk about coalescing a national movement. And so that's essentially what happened. Something like 1,100 people showed up from most every state, including Alaska and Hawaii, from territories like Puerto Rico and the Marshall Islands, and from Canada, from Central America, and actually, this was far more than I had expected. If I had several hundred people there to really start to coalesce, I would have thought that is a great success. But essentially, just show how deep and widespread this issue was. Um, so the summit, I mean, we went into the summit with two ideas that we would adopt a set of principles of environmental justice, and that there will be a call for action for people to go back to their communities to organize. And just to give you some flavor of what this was, I mean, some of the uh, this is the first time that many people, and this is what people say about their own experience there, is that they went there and they had no idea that they were part of this huge community of people working on issues. So people like Peggy Shepard and others were talking about how um they were all working alone, and finally for the first time they seen this, and so the speakers, just to give you some flavor, would included people like Tom Goldtooth, Gail Small, Mililani Trask from Hawaii, Jetan Anjan, who is now passed, but he was the person that brought the relocation of people in the Marshall Islands from the suffering from the nuclear bomb testing there. Dana Austin, Damu Smith, Richard Moore, Bob Bullard, Jesse Jackson spoke there. Baltimore Velasquez, who was a farm worker or organizer in the Midwest. Eleanor Holmes Norton, and what Representative Norton said. She was a delegate from the District of Columbia, And this was featured in the it was a Washington Post article about the birth of environmental justice, published in 2021. And and they quoted her on, and what she said was that someday, I guarantee you the nation will hear you. This I promise you. No, someday the nation will hear you. This I promise you. Um, I remember Hazel Johnson speaking and saying how her dream has finally come to pass, in terms of a meeting with, on environmental issues that had all these people of color in there. Dolly Burwell. So Dolly was, I hadn't introduced her yet, but many people know who she is. She was, one of the leaders in the Warren County protests, and she went to jail actually 5 times. And she talked about several years later at the summit about how when she and her neighbors lay down in front of the streets, in the streets in front of the trucks in 1982. Um, they were in fact really scared, but despite that, they resolved that henceforth and forevermore, African Americans in Warren County were determined to have a say in the government that controlled their destinies. So there's a long story that can grow out of this, because if you were to follow the path of many of these people I just mentioned, they continue to be environmental justice leaders today. They continue to be working on these issues, and beyond that, there's new generations of leadership that has come up, and in fact, um, the EJ movement is no longer is now multi-generational, and we can see new leaders come up, and new leaders in communities, but also that are occupying um, very high positions in government. And to this day, these 17 principles of environmental justice are used and looked to as an important set of principles by which people think about the issue. I do want to say before I end, and a lot of people really should make use of this, is that you, I guess one of the more important things I did was to commission a video of the summit, and there's a 2-hour summary of all the things that went on over those 3 or 4 days, and it is on the UCC website, and I highly recommend it to everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Dr. Lee, one more question for you. So moving forward, you joined the EPA in 1999. Now, over the last 26 years, you held a range of environmental justice positions. In terms of progress and achievements, as well as setbacks and obstacles, what stands out to you in terms of how the agency's commitment to environmental justice has resolved or has evolved? Excuse me.
Yeah, I there's a lot of that's a we can have like a full day conversation about that, right? And I have to say that when I first why did I go to work for EPA after you know advocating, criticizing a lot of the things that EPA was doing, um, and um, and it was because I mean there's a number of things, but it was I had chaired, I was a charter member of the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council. I chaired its Waste and Facility Siting Subcommittee. And I was particularly interested in doing that because I wanted to focus on there's a issue around brownfields, which are partially contaminated sites that were hundreds of thousands, maybe 500,000 in the country, and there was a real drag to urban revitalization, among other things. And so, I wanted to start to look at environmental justice, not just from the point of view of what kind of things you need to prevent and stop and mitigate, but also these are communities that are underserved and disinvested in, and so to really bring amenities and benefits to these communities. So this is a real opportunity. And so I thought of this as something that, uh, that I wanted to put myself in a position to be able to do that more effectively. So that's the reason. That was the one primary reason. I mean, there were other ones like the fact that I just realized that EPA had a lot of people working for on that were really dedicated and mission oriented to protecting human health and the environment. Um, uh, and so this work led to my thinking of and developing a environmental justice collaborative problem solving model. And this spawned a grant program that had been going on for the past decade and more than a decade. And and so the ideas all there are the ones that inform these large scale grant programs for environmental justice during the last administration, which were finally resources providing resources of scale commensurate with the issues involved that are involved, amounting to billions of dollars of resources. Um, we set a road to developing the basis for incorporating environmental justice in the regulatory process. One of my real proud accomplishments was to start hiring people with science background and with regulatory understanding of the science that go into environmental regulations. And we ended up developing guidance for the rulemaking process, both in terms of the process guidance as well as technical guidance. So that's a second thing. A third thing is during the Obama administration, I worked with Lisa Garcia, who was hired as a special um, uh, 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 advisor um, um, uh, uh, to Administrator Lisa Jackson, um, and um, um, and we develop a set of basic tools and guidance for integrating environmental justice into EPA. This involves things like uh, enforcement guidance. It involves the tools the guidance I just mentioned. Involved, the EJ screening and mapping tool. It involved a guidance for reviewing environmental justice issues within the NEPA process and many other things. So I just need to say, and this has to do with the 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 challenges of integrating environmental justice into governmental decision making. That it took nearly 20 years after the signing of the first original executive order on environmental justice for this to take place. And the reason for that is pretty simple. This is just a hard thing to do. And so but we started to finally make traction and progress around that. Um, Another thing I just want to point out is we work with states and really looked at lessons learned from states working on environmental justice. This is California's work and New York and Illinois and other places, and in terms of the use of their mapping tools and and using them to allocate resources to benefit communities which are overburdened and underserved. So all of this work led to the creation within the Biden administration of the Justice 40 initiative, which stipulated that 40% of a class of federal resources must benefit these overburdened and underserved communities. Um, the other thing, there's two other things I just want to point out. One was during the last administration under President Biden and Administrator Michael Regan, we established a national program office for environmental justice at EPA. So this is distinct from being a environmental office of environmental justice being a small office, but a national program office, just like many of the other programs at EPA, like the Office of Air or the Office of Water. Um, and and while a lot of people have not really understood the significance of this, this is really a real advance in terms of developing the kind of institutional infrastructure needed to integrate an issue like environmental justice into everything that EPA does. Administrator Regan made a call to truly center environmental justice in his mission. He said that we should make environmental justice part of the DNA of EPA. Um, and and there's another thing that most people don't know about, which is that EPA added to the way that its principles for how it carries out its mission. Um, in the past, the EPA, or ever since its beginning, EPA ca carried out its mission of protecting health and the environment with principles of follow the science, follow the law, and transparency. So a fourth principle was added, which is advancing justice and equity. Um, and then one more thing I just want to highlight, which is the passage of the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, which is people know is a bipartisan infrastructure bill, and the Inflation Reduction Act, which really brought uh, resources of scale, like I said, that was commensurate with the kind of problems that environmental justice represents. And what happened was that EPA developed a I would say, just an assortment, a constellation of grant programs that uh, really thought to um, provide the kind of technical assistance support and meet communities where they are, while at the same time being able to make real, concrete, tangible differences in communities. And this was really meant to fundamentally transform the relationship between communities, the government, and academia, industry, and other people. Um, just lastly, just want to highlight the fact that the one of the things that has been taking place and really picked up in the last several years is taking environmental justice across the entire federal family. There's the executive order on environmental justice, 14096, which is revitalizing environmental justice for all, is um, is calls for this whole of government approach. And certainly we know that these issues are intertwined and intersecting and require, you know, um, a holistic, comprehensive set of strategies. And this is the moving us in that direction. So, as far as setbacks and obstacles, there I think you could tell by what I just said. And I didn't go into a whole lot of details. There's a lot of obstacles to this kind of work. This is always going against the grain. And within there are many setbacks. This has never been easy. I always say that we're always facing a whole slew of unfinished business. Um, there are structural obstacles that have to do with learning and overcoming, learning about and overcoming um, uh, uh, barriers to truly authentic and meaningful community engagement. Um, there's a real blind spot in the way that not just EPA, but the entire environmental protection enterprise in this country approaches its work is a blind spot to um, the lack of understanding of the importance of considering distributional impacts of environmental burdens. Um, and there's a when we sent toxic waste and rates to EPA, the response was, well, EPA deals with issues of technology, not sociology. And I think we all know now there's you can't separate them, but in the way that things are set up, as far as the approach to their work, the environmental protection. Um, uh, the approach of most professionals and policy folks and scientists is to separate that. And so this is a big structural thing that we all have to overcome. Um, One other thing to point out is that this is hard work and it's going to take a while, to really none of this comes easy, and to really make things work, you need to have time to really sustain the work. And the fact that we're getting these changes in political administrations uh, has really been something that we all have seen now as making that really difficult. And so, we need to figure out how to address an issue like that. Um, I just want to end by saying that despite all this, as you can hear, um, this issue started with uh, for me, as something that didn't even have a name. And it is truly remarkable how far the environmental justice movement has come in a relatively short period of time. Um, the movement is healthy, it is thriving, it is here to stay.
Mr. Lee, looking at your expertise and what you've said as far as the EPA and looking at even your knowledge of what you've done in the past with toxic waste and race, with where we are today, how would you advise us as communities of faith and faith leaders to engage today?
Well, I said before that well that it didn't require a lot, that it was a small advocacy organization that did that report and the kind of impact that it had, right? Today, you know, we have so much more to work with. And so I think that there's a huge community uh, of people in faith organizations, they're in communities, in academia. You can go on down the line in various levels of government that are there to and we need to build up a community where we're working with each other and relying on each other and um, making the most use of all those resources that we do have. And resources is just not money. Resources are connections between people, is knowledge, is history, all that. And we have so much more of that now than we ever had before.
Charles, one thing I wanted to kind of circle back to is you briefly talked about the principles for environmental justice. And so I'm wondering if you could kind of explain for the audience like how that arose in the context of the summit, the impact it had, um, and the significance of it. For me, I think back to when you know, a number of years ago, first got involved in working on environmental issues, and I attended a workshop, and they're, teaching us how to articulate the values for why we're there and why we're advocating to close down a coal plant, right? And so, and it was like, oh, I'm not used to talking about values, like in
Hmm.
relationship to the environment. Like, how am I going to do this, and what's the language I'm going to use? So sometimes it can be taken for granted, I think, sort of the underlying values foundation of what we do. So that's also sort of behind like my thinking about what was the significance of that moment and the push for drafting those environmental justice principles.
I mean, I think that it was a really the idea was really simple. If you wanted to coalesce a movement, you need to have a set of principles. I mean, having a set of principles is really good, that sets some foundations. And so we went into the summit with a draft of it, and we established a process where people and even by that time, we have formed. Let me back up a little bit. The organizing of the summit took about 2 years. We had a small planning committee, but we also had a national advisory committee that was like 40 some, 45 some people. And so we had shared all that and gotten feedback from that in terms of a draft. And then when we got to the summit, we established a small group of people who to really work on it, and they worked on it like for 3 days, 2 or 3 days, and they came up with something, and the group ratified it. And I think at that point, it became something that had some real weight to it, um, and it wasn't just about a particular issue. It was just about the core values, like you were saying, that we should be coming to this work with. Understanding of, the importance of Mother Earth, for example, the importance of, people having self-determination, things like that.
I'm wondering, Doc, and listening that you talk about the summit, it sparked an idea with me. But before I can even go there, in a real practical way, who paid for this summit? How was it funded? How did you all get the resources to make this happen?
Well, some of that came from the UCC, right? And I went around and did a lot of fundraising. I think we raised more than $500,000 to help support it. I mean, the vast majority of that went to help support travel for people, because people had come from pretty long distances, and you know, f- um, and so that was the major thing. I was I'm really grateful. I was for all the people that came up, all the organizations that came through when we went to them to say, can you help support an effort like this? And so um, I like what is it I said in the introduction to the proceedings that the environmental movement in the United States, no, on October 24th through 27th in 1991, the environmental movement in the United States changed forever. And, that is really a true statement.
And I guess here's where I'm having this thought. And the reason I asked the question about who funded it, because I really wanted to hear the UCC's name come up in the support that it gave. but also to challenge those of us who are listening right now. Again, this was a small movement or a small group that came together, small organization that came together to put this together. But it had great support from its local congregations, its denomination, as well as those on the outside that helped to support this. And today, while things are as bleak as they are with this administration, isn't this a good time for us to come back together and have and rehash these conversations to see how we can advocate for the world that we want, but also being supported by our local congregations, our denominations, and those on the outside. So
Yeah,
I just
I think that I mean that's a complicated set of things you just said, you know. I mean, I think one of the things is that having something that brings people together as a whole, you know, as a large group with some clear agenda setting, purpose and things like that is going to be important. You know, how that comes about has to be truly organic and informed by and led by the communities themselves. You know, and it can't be done in a way in which um, people, large groups, institutions end up speaking for communities. You know, one of the principles that came out of that's part of the principles of environmental justice and, you know, really animated the summit was the fact that the idea we speak for ourselves. You know, so that's like one thing. And the second is that we can't rely on that only, you know, and that we need to figure out different ways in which we're creating these conversations, um, you know, in small groups, in our own settings, spaces to do this. I remember on the 30th anniversary of the summit, which was in 2021. You know, a number of people came and said, you know, maybe we should do in the 30th anniversary summit, right? 2021 was the beginning of this huge upsurge in EJ activity. And, you know, people were really wrapped up in getting work done, right? And they were and so, you know, I suggested that no, you know, maybe not to spend a whole lot of time and effort, eh, having this one big thing. Uh, Perhaps people should just commemorate this as part of their ongoing work. And I think, you know, we have to figure out ways in which we are doing this kind of engagement and and building of support and relationships with each other as part of our ongoing work, you know, and you know, you have to build a strong base. And you know, this is one of the things that I think what made for a really strong EJ movement is the fact that it was so decentralized, that it was so I think I think first of all, you know, just to as a very first thing, um, it would be great if, in the spirit of what you just said, Michael, um, uh, that UCC congregations reach out to community groups, and develop a partnership, a partnership, and work together. And I think out of that will grow a lot of really great things.
Thanks. I really appreciate that emphasis on the relational quality of this work, and I just am amazed that like 2 years of kind of relational work to get to the summit is quite an impressive way that summit came about. As we come to a close, I do want to, have one question that I know for, some of our audiences is on their mind. As we read in the newspaper about kind of headlines about, the impact of the current administration on the EPA, are there things that our audience should know that maybe, go beyond what we see in the headlines? I mean, in terms of how EPA staff are impacted or other things. What should the audience know about the EPA today and what's happening under the current administration?
That's a long question, right? I think, but I would just say two things. The first is that we have to recognize the kind of um, that people are really being hurt by this in terms of their own personal lives, and that and that we need to this is something we need to kind of make sure we recognize all the pain that's out there. Of course, there's a conversation in there about just the very way that this is being done. That's I think uh, we can talk about. The second is that the is the young people that came to work for this issue. I mean, I see there's real hope in terms of the kind of things that all the young people that came to work around and were drawn to and came to work for EPA as well as many other organizations across the country, that are uh, really really uh, enthusiastic and knowledgeable about these issues. They're the ones that's going to really lead us into the future.
Thank you. I appreciate your answering that question and giving us some further thought and insight into how to think about this present moment. We unfortunately have come to the end of our time here. We are so grateful for what you have shared with us today, Charles. It's been truly remarkable to get a glimpse into your journey and all that you have to offer to us today from the wisdom you've accumulated, from your stories. There's so much for us to partake of as we learn to be better citizens, but also be more faithful in our faith. And so, thank you so much for being with us. We will be back again next month with another webinar. Michael, any final words for us before we depart, full of gratitude for Charles?
I just want to express the same gratitude, Charles, for you being with us, and hope that we were all able to receive something from this particular conversation. Thank you again.
Thank you for having me.
Take care, everyone, and thank you for being with us.